Before we even talk about this absolutely butt-punching crazy movie, can we please take a moment to talk about how wild it is to be in a time where Terrifier 3, a completely depraved, nasty throwback slasher movie with bizarre supernaturalism and an incredibly mean spirit, is just absolutely killing at the box office? I haven't been in a packed theater with this much communal energy in it in years. First the substance was smashing and now we've got this. Horror is alive and well, everyone. Even if you're not a fan of this franchise or either of these movies, the success that these balls-to-the-wall unique films have is something that should be celebrated and commended. It's been a weird experience to see Saw fans criticizing Terrifier for being torture porn and Friday the 13th fans say that there's too much gore and not enough story. I'm not sure what's going on there, but regardless of personal feelings here, this absolutely is something to be happy about. An unrated, independent slasher beating out a DC Comics movie? That's big. Terrifier 3. My God. If there were ever any doubts about whether Art the Clown was truly going to have any staying power after the cultural phenomenon that the second movie was, let those be quelled. The dude is not going anywhere anytime soon, and if I had any hesitance in calling him a full-blown horror icon before, that is now all gone. As with Terrifier 2 though, there is a hell of a lot more going on in this movie than Art the Clown creatively taking out some unfortunate folks, and while it's still going to be a while before I can go in depth on it, I was so excited walking out of the theater that I still do want to talk about it. The first thing I want to get out of the way right up front is the massive step up in both production value as well as the performances. The first movie had a very run and gun, grimy, low budget feel to it, which certainly has its appeal for some, but there's no way to get around saying that it's a pretty cheap looking movie a lot of the time. Terrifier 2 had some big improvements where that's concerned, but going into this third movie, the fact that Leone got to focus so much more of his time on the actual direction since he wasn't also heading the makeup effects this time around is very clear. I've always been a fan of Christmas horror, and I really appreciated how much went into building up the overall dark, festive feel to this movie. You've got these super deep shadows and very rich, saturated Christmas lights, the switch to using anamorphic lenses that adds this beautiful haze onto the lights and gives a really dreamy look to the whole movie. There's so much contrast in the frame, and it's just a really goddamn good looking movie. It's not just the colors though, because the actual camera work itself has also seen a big step up. The movie just looks way more professional overall, but it's impressive to see how well Leone managed to retain the gritty and grimy feel of the franchise while also adding so much more polish to the production. To be clear, this is not a cleaned up Terrifier flick from a presentation perspective, it's just a way better looking version of that nastiness than we saw in the last two. It's very reminiscent visually to the original Black Christmas, which is massive praise because I think that's one of the best looking slashers out there. Performances as well have seen a huge leap, which is of course thanks to the actors getting more time to know their characters and progressing in their craft in the 5 years since Terrifier 2 was shot, but it also loops back around to the fact that Leone had more time to focus on working with his actors because, you know, he's not editing the movie this time and he wasn't doing the makeup effects. This movie is far and away the best showcase of Leone's capabilities as a director up to this point. Lauren Levera, oh my God, she is bringing her A-game in this one, with her character now reeling from the events of the second film and dealing with the lasting trauma from it. I was honestly a little weary of this angle because that's been done a lot in modern slasher films and it usually is not handled well at all, but there's this incredible synergy of the film's tone with Levera's performance here that makes it feel like one of the strongest portrayals of the trauma from someone like Art the Clown in a slasher movie. I was really impressed by just how well they were able to convey this kind of thing. Sienna was already my favorite final girl in a very long time, and this movie didn't only solidify that, it made me love the character even more now getting to see this other angle of her. Elliot Fulham also shows that he's matured as an actor since the last one, but his character is honestly where my main issue with the movie comes from. I was really curious to see what they do with him here, and there is a cool role reversal with him and Sienna from their dynamic in the last movie, but Jonathan's character gets really sidelined. They had a lot of cool setup of certain things going on with him, and especially since he's become very closed off with Sienna since their last encounter with Art the Clown, and he's apparently changed a lot from the last time she saw him, it would have been really nice to get more from that character. Like, I wanted to get to know him. The handling of this character is the only element of this movie that I feel really iffy about, but I also think that it's pretty clear that there's going to be more payoff to this in Terrifier 4. I just can't give credit to something that doesn't exist. So for now, it is the main negative I have with the movie. Nothing to do with Fulham's performance, because he's actually really great, and the shift in his personality from the first is something that I actually found pretty chilling, because you can tell how much it broke him. There is one other problem that I have with the movie, but it's not a major one. It has to do with Mia, the girlfriend of Jonathan's roommate. She's sort of this vessel that they're using to try and explore the exploitation of victims in the true crime world, which I actually think is a great thing for this franchise to explore, given the state of that sort of thing right now and the extreme nature of the franchise, but she's too much of a caricature. I think her plotline with Sienna and Jonathan could have hit a lot harder if she didn't feel like a cartoon character version of an exploitative true crime podcast host, but it's pushed too far, unfortunately. She is meant to be insufferable, and that's not the issue. It's that she just doesn't feel like a person at all, which, in surprising contrast to the rest of the cast being very solid and believable as people, she sticks out like a sore thumb. The first Terrifier had next to nothing in terms of narrative or characters. The second movie had more of a focus on them, but was more about expanding on the overall story and setting up that divine arc between Art and Sienna, and this third movie expands on all of it while having much more of a focus on character work and dealing with the trauma following what happened. There's some seriously good stuff in here, especially relating to certain elements of Sienna's backstory that I won't get into here, but there are some really touching moments that come out of this, and as a massive fan of the lore this franchise is building, those moments made me very happy, and they're also like a nice tender reprieve from the overall very depraved tone of this movie. Before talking about the overall narrative and how it expands on the lore set up in the second movie, of course, I need to touch on Arthur Claus himself. I stole that from Killjoy Jake, sorry buddy, that name is too perfect. Now, if it weren't for David Howard Thornton basically carrying that first movie on his back, I really don't think this franchise would have exploded in the same way that it did. He's easily the best thing about it, and in the second movie, I felt like he'd mastered Art the Clown as a character, and the franchise going forward would just be him cruising along at the level he was at there. And I was dead wrong. I continue to be blown away by how charismatic Thornton is capable of being, and by how much expression he's able to pull out of this voiceless character, and the fact that he once again was able to top his performance in the previous film is frankly astounding to me. While this is the darkest and meanest entry in the franchise so far, it's also easily the funniest, and has now topped the Clerk interaction in terms of my favorite patented Art the Clown fucking with people scene. There is a scene in a bar that had me just in stitches, cackling like a fucking child, while at the same time being so taken aback by the fact that Thornton is just getting better and better and showing deeper understanding of this character every time. There are so many moments that had the whole theater laughing in unison, and it makes me feel like I just don't know where the limit is for how much further Thornton can push the physicality. I thought it had peaked last time, and I was gravely mistaken, so I'm just gonna sit back and let him do his thing. This time around though, it isn't just Art the Clown out on his own. The little pale girl was there in Terrifier 2, but she was largely passive in most of what's going on. This time around, we've got Victoria Hayes back, actively participating in things and finally serving a clear purpose for the first time in this franchise that has been giving us next to nothing in terms of her role in the story. Samantha Scafidi reprises her role from the last two, and she gets the chance to actually do stuff in this one, which is great to see, especially because she's one of the best things about the whole damn movie. It's interesting once again to see Art interacting with a character who he doesn't immediately try and kill, but the dynamic this time around is different from the little pale girl because Victoria can actually talk and she seems to play around a little more. She is such a great addition to this franchise and shows that Leone isn't interested in establishing a motif for these movies and then cruising with it. He wants to keep it fresh and new and unpredictable. A lot of this movie felt like it was saying, yes, you know what this franchise is, and that's always going to be there, but don't think you ever fully get it. This is a very different feeling movie from either of the last two, while also incorporating the things about them that work and introducing some new wild stuff into the mix. It's very impressive. One more thing before we talk about the movie's lore and where the franchise is heading. Of course, I have to talk about the kills and finally answer that question as to how this movie handles children in that regard, which has been quite a point of contention since that first teaser release almost a year ago. With a dedicated makeup effects team now taking the load off of Damien's hands and a massive increase to the budget, the practical effects in this entry are the best they have ever been. They look less rubbery than they did before, and there is such an absurd amount of detail with the anatomy of the human body here that certainly delivers and improves on what you've come to expect from the violence in this franchise. I don't think there's a kill that's going to be quite as iconic as the bedroom scene from Terrifier 2, although it's quite clear which one they wanted that to be. The best way I describe it here is to take the level of Brooke's death in the second movie and just assume that almost every kill is going to be something to that degree. I was chatting with Dylan from Splattercast and Cody Leach for a spoiler discussion that's going to be up on Splattercast tomorrow, and it turns out that all three of us had the same favorite kill in the movie, and it wasn't the one that was clearly meant to try and hit the level of the bedroom scene, which should go to say just how much Leone's got lined up in this one. Well, it doesn't have quite the same novelty that the violence in the last two did, since we're a lot more used to what this franchise has to offer now. It's in the creativity of each kill where I think this entry tops all of the others. There's just so much variety in how Art decides to go about his craft here, and with the amped up practical effects, I do think that this movie has the strongest kills of the franchise overall. In terms of how they handle children here, I don't want to give away too much, but I'm of course going to be hinting at something here. If you feel that having children die in any context in a slasher movie is a no-go, maybe go see something else. If you feel it's dependent on context and presentation, you're probably fine. Leone is very good at reading the room in terms of how far to push things, going right up to the line and placing his toe over it, but not pushing anything so far that it just becomes unfun. This kind of thing is as tasteful as this subject matter can be in regards to Art the Clown. To be very clear though, there is absolutely nothing like watching a bedroom scene with a kid in it. That is not happening here. You can tell they wanted to push boundaries and make you feel uncomfortable, but they didn't want to ruin the experience of it, and for me at least, that balance was hit quite well. Part of what Leone wanted to do with this movie was to make Art as despicable as possible, as he's talked about how people have become really comfortable with the character and wanted to try and take that away and make you hate him. And to me, that was certainly accomplished. But what makes it great is that by the end of the movie, I absolutely do want to see him taken down, but I also can't help but continue to be thoroughly entertained by his antics. This is a nasty, mean-spirited, and depraved movie that, for me at least, accomplished its goal of making Art more despicable than he was before, hence building up a lot of anticipation for what's to come. One other thing I did want to talk about is that these movies, and Leone as a person, have been criticized by some for being misogynistic. Now, and that's, it's not something where I'm like, what? Where did you get that idea from? I know where it's coming from, but if you ever watch Leone in interviews, you'll know that's just not at all the case. And to prove that point, just watch Terrifier 3 and that should hopefully dispel you of that notion. I think it's really unfortunate that that narrative has been built up around these movies, not just because it mischaracterizes Leone as a person, but also because I think it's just blatantly discrediting the fact that the most powerful human character in this franchise is Sienna. She's an absolutely bona fide badass, but also isn't just randomly stronger than everyone and completely flawless. She's a great and nuanced character who is, as he said, Leone's favorite character he's ever written. All right, I've made it very clear that for me, the main thing that has my attention in this franchise is the cosmic good versus evil battle that was set up in the second movie. And so going into the third one, I really wanted to get some more expansion on that plot line, and I could not be more satisfied with what they did in that regard. Part of that satisfaction comes from some theories that I had in the second movie that some people in the comments said I was stupid for thinking were flat out confirmed here, and that was quite reassuring. But it's mostly just that the divinity that was present before is emphasized so much more here. One of the things I was a little weary about going in was that while the movie was in production, Leone was talking about how he wanted to dial back on the supernatural elements and make something more in line with the tone of the first one. And while this is definitely darker and meaner than the second was, these supernatural elements are alive and well and go even further than they did in the second movie. So I'm not sure if he changed his mind while writing the movie or something, but that kind of thing is absolutely a focus of the story. The religious imagery and symbolism is cranked up even further in the third act here, and the things that it's indicating made me want Terrifier 4 next month, because good God almighty, am I ever excited to see where this goes next. The Christmas setting isn't only there to shake things up a bit and show Art in a new setting, it's actually quite tied in with the arc in the movie and how we're setting up the symbolism of Art and Sienna, and the way some of this is portrayed got my blood pumping. I just love how wild and out there they're getting with the lore, and one of the main takeaways here is that Leone absolutely has an overall plan in mind, and trying to figure out where it's going is pointless. My only wish list for the story going forward is that Leone just keeps doing whatever it is he's doing, because there's such a divine, badass storyline playing out here that I cannot wait to finally get the conclusion for eventually. I don't want these movies to go on forever. I want this storyline with Art and Sienna to get wrapped up in either the next movie or maybe one more after that, and then I'll be perfectly happy if it's just put to bed afterwards. Tonally, the movie is a really great blend of everything that the franchise has done up to this point, while also being its own thing. You've got the gritty, mean spirit of the first, you've got the over-the-top humor and religious symbolism from the second, but then there's this new vibe to this movie that shows how much gas is still in the tank here. The third act of Terrifier 3 is the first time in the franchise that I've actually felt afraid of anything in a Terrifier movie. Before it was, being grossed out or having a fun time, but there's some stuff towards the end here that actually got to me a hell of a lot more than I was expecting going into it, which made me completely rethink what I thought I knew about the nature of these movies, and I respect the hell out of that. I wasn't sure if this was going to be able to live up to what I felt leaving Terrifier 2, because there was so much novelty there that helped that feeling, but I honestly think that this is the best movie of the franchise so far. I will always love Terrifier 2, but there's just a level of quality in the third entry that I think makes it hard for me to come to any other conclusion. In terms of which one I personally prefer, I'm honestly not sure right now. Terrifier 2 has had time to settle in, and I've done a deep dive on it, which always makes me appreciate movies more since I get so involved in the little intricacies of a movie for a few weeks while making the video, so I feel like I'll need to see the third one more and get deeper into it before I can really say. Preference is one thing, but in terms of sheer quality, this is easily the top of the list if you ask me, and I just can't wait to see Terrifier 4. Of course, at some point down the line, I'll be revisiting this in a more in-depth style video like I did for the first two, but for now, I am going to leave it there. I know that some of you had asked for a spoiler discussion right away, but there will be one up on Splattercast channel tomorrow with Cody Leach that I joined in on, so go check that one out. Depending on when this gets its home video and VOD release, I may be able to make that video happen in December, but if there's not enough time, then I'm going to save it for a more fitting time. Terrifier 3 is absolutely fantastic and more than lives up to the hype, in many ways exceeding it and delivering the franchise's best entry to date. My hype for the fourth film has gone up exponentially. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.